Good morning and good Shabbos. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this morning by my dear friends, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and Rabbi Marc Gellman, and it's Shabbos morning Torah study. I hope that all of you are taking good care of yourselves and enjoying these beautiful spring days in any way that you can with a mask on, but enjoying them nonetheless. This morning, we are reaching the end of the book of Leviticus. The last two parshiot of the book of Leviticus are in front of us today, and these are remarkable chapters. And I'd like to begin with a simple observation. One of the most interesting words that has become so very current in our contemporary vocabulary is the word spirituality. Now, if you look up spirituality in the dictionary, you'll find that it's usually associated as a synonym for religion or religiosity. But in our culture, people use it as an opposite. They'll say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, by which they mean that they have certain feelings about transcendent things. They have certain ideas about where they fit into the universe and what's expected of them, but they're not interested in participating in collective religion. They're not interested in participating in traditions that are set before them. They're interested in sort of blazing their own path into religious life. The word spirituality, however, has an interesting history. It comes from the Christian tradition, and before that from the Gnostic tradition, which saw a division between body and soul. They saw the human being is divided between body and soul, and spirituality was the opposite of materiality. So things spiritual should not be polluted by things material. And things material, well, there's no room in there for spirituality. And so when you speak of spirituality, you expect not to be confronted with things as crude or as low as materiality. And that's the reason why people come to shul. And when a rabbi, for example, would ask for a contribution to tzedakah, a contribution to the community, people get very upset. They get very hurt. Very, very, very offended because you have ruined my spiritual moment with a material note. You have ruined my spirituality with materiality, invaded the spiritual realm with materiality. But if you open the book, if you open the Torah, you're going to discover that this opposition of materiality and spirituality is not Jewish. I mean, this week's Torah portion is all about economics. It is about sacred economics, and that's an oxymoron if you understand spirituality. The priests of Israel, the Kohanim, the ones who served the people of Israel as religious teachers and functionaries, did not own property. They were the only unpropertied people in the community. They were supported by contributions to the shrine and frankly, by the sacrifices that Jews would bring. And in this chapter, this class of people who were unproperty, who were standing outside of the marketplace, outside of the ebb and flow of goods and services and money and trade, look into that world and they offer us a vision. And that vision is a vision of a utopian society. Now, the language is very interesting. So the language begins by Deber Adonai Moshe Lemor, God speaks to Moshe, Behar Sinai. And the Torah portion is called Behar. It's actually Behar Sinai. This is something God said on Mount Sinai. And what you expect next, of course, is something exalted, something transcendent, something about your soul and your vision and your eternal life. And that's not what it says. When you enter the land that I assign you, the land shall observe a Sabbath to the Lord. What law is given specifically and in deliberately Behar Sinai, on the holy mountain of Sinai? This notion of a sabbatical year for the land. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. Now, that's partially to protect the soil. But more than that, what does that do to the farmer? That means that for 6 years, the farmer farms his or her land. In the 7th year, there's no cultivation of the land. You simply eat the aftergrowth, whatever grows naturally. And then in the 8th year, what you need to do, or you eat what's in the silo. In the 8th year, which you plant, you have to wait for the thing to harvest, then you eat whatever you could pull out of the land. And what that does is it completely overturns a social hierarchy, because I have employees who work for me for 6 years, but in the 7th year, they don't work for me anymore because they can't farm the land. They have to go get the aftergrowth as well. And then it gets even crazier. And here's where it gets really utopian. You shall count off, this is verse 8 of chapter 25 of the book of Leviticus. If you're in Eitz Chaim, it's on page 739. You'll count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, period of 7 weeks, total of 49 years. And you shall sound the horn in the 7th month, the 10th day. That's Yom Kippur. And you'll have the horn sounded throughout the land. And what's going to happen? It shall be a jubilee. The Hebrew is yovel. So jubilee is just a translation, a transliteration of that. And what happens is you don't grow anything. And here's what's really crazy. Everybody goes back to go. Mm-hmm. It's whatever you've earned in the years since the 50th year. You push it all into the middle, and everybody takes out an equal share. So if you have made it big in the 49 years since the last Jubilee, you push into the middle of the game board all your stocks and bonds and earnings. If you have starved, you put your starvation in the middle, and everyone takes out a return to their ancestral land. This is a protection, it seems to me, against systemic poverty. Because what the priests were worried about, what they could see from their vantage of propertyless life, was the way systemic poverty, 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations in poverty, you can't get out. By that time, medical care, health care, nutrition, schools, it's a trap. You can't get out. You can't pull yourself out of that poverty. And in order to prevent systemic poverty from infecting the life of the Israelites, the priests give us this crazy idea that nobody owns anything, that everything you own, you only lease for 49 years, and then it all goes back in the middle, and you get back your ancestral land, your ancestral wealth. So the first thing is that it changes the whole distribution of wealth, and it addresses the question of income inequality, of economic inequality, what we call economic injustice. And the second thing it does is it prevents us from falling too far into our roles as employer and employee, as landlord and tenant, because those roles tend to alienate us from each other. You become an other, you become an object. You're my customer, you're my employee, you're my servant, you're my serf, you're my slave. And when that happens, and you create social classes of people who have this endemic power, and they begin to believe this is where I belong, and that's where you belong, you end up with a breakdown of the kind of humanistic solidarity that the Torah imagined. Sherre, what do you think?
I think Marc can't even contain himself. Marc, you go first, and then I'll weigh in.
Yeah, look, this is my favorite example of how the Torah was not written by an economist. Because oftentimes the best ideas have the worst consequences. And this is clearly one of the best ideas in the Torah, and it clearly has one of the worst consequences in the entire Torah. What happened, you see, is that the law was that debts, there would be a manumission of debts, that debts will be canceled on this year, and on every 7th year. And on the Yovel, slaves would go free. So just think about what that did to the economic cycle, all right? You're a farmer, and you're buying seed to plant on credit. You get a loan from the seed merchant, and you pay him back after there's a harvest. Well, if there's a cancellation of debt, the person who's lending him, if it's the first year of the 6-year cycle, he'll lend him the money. But if it's in the 6th year, he's not lending him the money. So that, in fact, this great and glorious idea, which you beautifully described in its intention, had the opposite effect. it impoverished in a much more extreme way everyone who was already poor. And the rabbis, of course, figured this out. Hillel, the first of the rabbis, was the first one to say, in effect, this is nuts. This idea is making people more poor because it's destroying credit. So he invented a loophole around this entire system called, as you know, the prose bull, which allowed people to offer a loan and have it continue over the year when it was supposed to be canceled. So this is a perfect example of how good ideas can have terrible consequences, something which we're in the middle of debating in our culture as a whole.
Marc, I want to pivot from what you said and turn back towards Eddie. You're asking about the efficacy and whether it's right or wrong, the suggestion, the economic suggestion. I want to go 1,000 feet above that and say it's extraordinary that the Torah is talking about the mundane economics of everyday life. And I think it, Eddie, as you so beautifully said, the Torah is not about how to be sacredly twined with God 24/7. Judaism is to teach us about every aspect of our life. And the business side is a huge aspect of our life. Now I want to address exactly what you said, which is I don't think there's a more timely moment of which to speak about economic disparity, right? The fact that Judaism has wisdom on how we relate to one another, what roles we adopt, how we exchange money, and that those are questions we have to ask, I think is tremendously powerful, and it makes me keep coming back to Behar and Bechukotai. The third thing I want to say before I turn it back over to you is that what if we're in a 6th year of a Yovel right now? What if we had an economic reset? What if we had a plan for something like this? How would that change the conversation that's happening right now? What would that look like? Just entertaining those questions, I think, is a very powerful way for us to look at the Parsha this week and say, what is Judaism trying to teach me about the life I'm living in this moment as we're having these very complicated discussions about an economy that's imploding second by second?
So I think Marc is right about the solution, but I think that just because the solution isn't practical doesn't mean that the question wasn't the right question, that the problem isn't real. The problem is very real, and the rabbis struggled with this over the course of the centuries of what do you do about all of the effects, both human and economic, of poverty. If you take a look for a moment at chapter 25, verse 35, it's just a little bit farther ahead in the Torah portion. V'chi yamuch achicha umateh yado. If your kinsman being in straits come under your authority, and the interesting thing the rabbis point out, it's just the third word, ki yamuch achicha. It literally means when your brother falls, when your brother stumbles, right? The first thing that the Torah wants you to realize is that somebody who is of another economic status is not of another species. This is your brother, damn it. Mm-hmm. This is your sister. This is your family. The homeless guy who lives under the bridge outside the community, the homeless family that begs on the street, they're not, I mean, we've learned, we who live in urban centers, we've learned so well to not see them, to overlook them, to rationalize. And the Torah says, no, this is you, damn it. Take a look. You have to feel that this is you and this is your family and this is your responsibility. This is not a responsibility that you can that you can somehow push away, that you can alienate yourself from these people and say, this is not my problem. So Marc is right. The solution that the Torah comes up with is the kind of solution that a bunch of propertyless priests would come up with. Not true. It's a kind of solution when I was in college and we would sit up late at night, with beer, thinking about how we would reorganize American society. This is the sort of thing that we would do. You know, American college is the only place where Soviet communism is still considered a serious option. But the real question is the question that's being asked. The question that's being asked is, what do we do about systemic poverty? How do we see the other as achicha, as my brother? And how do I prevent the economic transaction, which by nature turns us into subject and object, which by nature objectifies the other? How do I keep that from seeping in to every aspect of my social life? So every aspect of social life becomes a species of buying and selling, of consuming, of using the other as I use commodities and products. That's the question. This may not be the right solution, Marc. You might be right. You're absolutely right. But how do you answer you at least listen to the question that the priests are asking? All right, you're shaking your head, so go ahead.
Look, the issue is how do we understand economic transactions? And if you only understand it as a way of exploiting the poor, the sort of Marxist critique, which fits really quite hand in glove, it fits into this Torah portion that basically economic interchange objectifies the other person, commodifies the other person. If their labor isn't valued in the marketplace, then they aren't paid enough. And if they have some strange skill, they're paid way too much. I take a different view. And my view is that the greatest force for human freedom is not a bunch of abstract ideas. The greatest force for human freedom is the market. The market allows people to rise up from poverty by using their ingenuity and their effort and their assets. And that effort allows people to move up. The alternative model is a kind of insult, from my point of view, insulting noblesse oblige. Oh, you poor benighted soul, let me put some coins in my cape, and I'll walk through the village and let the people see the coins spilling out of my cape, and they'll see how kind and good I am. No, it's quite a different thing. I mean, if you cancel the debts of the person who's selling seed, he can't feed his family. It's not just that the farmer gets the seed, but that the man selling the seed can't feed his family. You can't alter the laws of the marketplace. What you can do is superimpose on the laws of the marketplace Jewish values of tzedakah, of charity, kindness, gratitude, and compassion, which blunt the effects of market interactions. But we cannot take the point of view, I don't think, consistently, that and Jewishly, that the market is an enemy of human interchange in a spiritually effective way. The market enables spirituality. The market enables human growth. It enables human wealth, which enables freedom. And that's the point that I would make.
I actually don't think you guys are arguing against each other. I think, Eddie, you're talking about the transactional nature of the marketplace. And Marc, you're speaking about the opportunity to take Jewish values and infuse those transactions with meaning and purpose. And I would go one step further. Instead of just looking at the transactions and figuring out how to apply our Judaism to it, I would start with, what if they weren't just transactions? What if we said, I am in relation to you and I see you, and you are not just an object of something I want or something I can give, but I see you and I want to do business with you, which doesn't mean exchange of stuff. It means I want to see you and be in connection with you from the get-go. How would that change how we do marketplace business? So not after the fact, before the fact.
The concern is not just, though, the freedom of the marketplace. The concern is what the marketplace does to human interactions in general.
So that's interesting. That's interesting. It's by playing in the marketplace, do you become shaped so much by it that you can't even see how you are behaving in ways that don't match your values?
Yeah, because it becomes the mode in which we approach each other. We commodify each other, right? I mean, look at that. I mean, I hate to use this example, but look at like online dating. And my daughter was doing this for a long time, and she used to tell me all these stories. I mean, it's like you buy stuff online, you buy a mate online. It becomes a commodification of a human being. It becomes the way. So, Marc, you're right. Of course, the marketplace is a mechanism for maximum freedom. You're exactly correct, and I actually agree with you. I'm not a Marxist, and I don't think the Torah is either. But the modifications that you have to lay on top of it. The Torah went farther than the later rabbis did. The rabbis gave us tzedakah. That's true. And a life of mitzvot. That's true. But the Torah was more concerned about that commodification and objectification and alienation of human beings from one another. And so it let you have a market economy for 49 years and then overturns the game and starts all over again. But you don't like that. So no, I hear you.
I love that. And I think we are in agreement. But I would make the point even stronger than I made it before. And that is, Jews do better in market economies than they do in controlled economies, in feudal economies, in authoritarian or communist economies. We do, everyone, not just Jews. Everyone.
I was going to say, what's the Jews versus everyone?
Looking at Jewish history, I mean, our example of our people and our history shows that, look, in 17th century Amsterdam and in Weimar Germany and in America, particularly after World War II, in fundamentally committed market economies, freedom grows, safety for all people grows, and I think that goes back to actually the symbol of this week's portion, which is the Liberty Bell, which shows the connection between economic freedom and the American dream, which was at its root a biblical dream, and that we see perfectly instantiated in the Liberty Bell, which had a verse from this week's portion in Behar. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. And so I am a fierce defender of the market, even though I believe my daughter, who's a teacher, should make more than LeBron James, who can put a basketball through a hoop. But that's not what the market says. That's not what the market says. And I'm willing to accept the market because I understand that the market isn't the last word. And that's where we agree, that there's other words that have to be spoken. And that is people who just through their lack of abilities or their upbringing or just sheer terrible bad luck are not able to sell their labors in the marketplace. They need to be lifted up. They need to be helped. And that's what our tradition brings us to do.
So it is a very not well-known secret that tomorrow is Rabbi Gellman's birthday, and this is his bar mitzvah Torah portion. So, Marc, what was the speech you gave Jan many years ago?
It was so bad. It was May 20th in 1960 at Temple Shalom in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and even then I was an irritating chacham. I just you couldn't really suffer me, and it was worse then. So I started up by saying, "You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Do these words sound familiar? Well, they should. I just read them from the Torah. How lame is that? But I can't forget my first line of that speech. And ever since, I've had a kind of emotional connection to the Liberty Bell And I wanted our students, our viewers, to have some information about it that they might not know. And that is that it wasn't called the Liberty Bell. It was called the State House Bell until the Civil War, when the Liberty Bell became the symbol of liberty for African American slaves. And they saw the bell as the example of freedom, proclaim liberty throughout the land. And even now, every year on July 4th, the Liberty Bell is struck 13 times by descendants from the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And also on Martin Luther King Day, Coretta Scott King wanted the Liberty Bell to be struck in honor of her deceased husband. And the other element of the Liberty Bell is that it was part of the American founding. That this, you say, well, why did they pick a verse from Leviticus for the Liberty Bell? And the answer is because the founders of America were deeply, deeply rooted in the Bible. They weren't deeply rooted in Judaism, but they were deeply rooted in the Bible. In Trinity Church, the oldest church down that was right near the towers where they fell. In Trinity Church, on their altar, they have the name of God in Hebrew. The name of God in Yud Hey Vav Hey is right there. So all these generations of American upper class Protestants were praying at an altar which had Hebrew on it. And of course, all of the Ivy League colleges their first curriculum was in Hebrew. And the first Jew to ever gain a degree from an American university was Judah Monis, who had a degree in Hebrew from Harvard. And there was a connection, a deep and powerful connection. The Liberty Bell was part of the seal of America. When they were considering the seal, there was a committee of Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson. Now, I've had many committees at my synagogue. None of them were that good. But imagine if on your committee you had John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And their first suggestion was for the seal, not of America, was not the eagle grasping the arrows and the thing with the wings out. Their suggestion for the seal of America was the scene of the crossing of the Red Sea. And they said, rebellion against tyrants is fidelity to God. That was supposed to be the seal of America. So we forget that even at a time when there weren't that many Jews in America, and even at a time when the Jews who were here experienced severe discrimination, the truth of the matter is there is a natural, deep, and ineluctable connection between the Bible and America, and we see that in the Liberty Bell.
Well, that's a beautiful sermon, and I'm sure it was a moving bar mitzvah speech.
They like the herring better.
But I'm forced to ask you very seriously now. Come on, the verse on the Liberty Bell comes in the context of this sense that you have to compromise your economic freedom of the marketplace in order to achieve a sense of solidarity with the people of your community, that your responsibility to the poor transcends your freedom to do what you want in the marketplace. And that's the verse they put on the Liberty Bell. So what does that tell you about the American project? What does that tell you?
They were talking about freedom. They weren't talking about economic redistribution.
No, but that's what the Torah is talking about. And they knew the context of the Torah.
This wasn't a Yovel. This was a Dror. It was proclaimed.
But they knew the context of the Torah. Mark, what I'm suggesting to you is that when people say, for example, and I'm not endorsing anybody here, but when Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist and people say, that's not American, this would indicate that that's as American as the Liberty Bell. Because
Well-
he's talking about an answer to the same set of issues.
Because they fought in Pennsylvania for the 50th anniversary of the Pennsylvania Constitution, which is how it was built. They saw America as the new Israel. They did. And they saw King George as the new Pharaoh. So the images of the Torah were very, very inspiring to them. They didn't take with it the economic idea that they should redistribute wealth at the 50th year. They took with it the idea that America is a land of freedom, and the Bible tells us God wants freedom. And in the Declaration of Independence, we see this even more than in the Bell, where Jefferson, in his first version of the Declaration, did not write these words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." His first version that Franklin changed was, "We hold these truths to be sacred, that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights." Because it is not self-evident that people are created in the image of God. It is a matter of religious belief. And America was formed on religious belief. And I think the best parts of America still are.
And I'm going to push back just a little bit, because that was beautiful again. But I think that Jefferson had a notion that we're supposed to live in small agrarian villages. Because in the small agrarian villages, you don't have income inequality the way that you do in a metropolis. Because in a small village, you take care of each other. Because there is a sense of ki amucha chicha. When your brother falls on hard times, he is your responsibility. I actually think that that kind of mutual responsibility and solidarity is built into the American project. And I think we've forgotten it. And I think Sherry's point is very important. This crisis, as certain crises in our past, as the crisis of the Great Depression, this crisis is reminding us once again that we are actually responsible for each other, that we are actually one nation, you know, and if we are one nation indivisible, then we are responsible. The poor are not other. They are not some other alienated species I don't have to worry about. They are completely my problem, and we have to figure out how to bring them home, bring them in, and provide for their children and provide for them. Sherre, you have a last word?
I mean, I don't have a solution to the problem, but I think,
come on.
I mean, I am not an economist. I am a lowly rabbi, and among the two of you, I just am like a student, so happy to sit with you. I think we can't not speak about the problem. I think it's easy to say, I'm okay, my family's okay, what's going on for me is okay, I don't really have to worry about everybody else. And I think that's the opposite of being a Jew. I think we have to think very hard about everybody that walks in our worlds, around our worlds, between us, and the people that we pretend to not see. I think we have to look very closely now more than ever.
Thank you. Marc, a last word?
Yeah, look, I think we have to care for each other, but I think the greatest way to care for each other is to allow people to work and provide for their families. For Maimonides, who was so sophisticated on the levels of charity, the highest level of charity is not to give anybody anything, but to enable them to work and earn a living and sustain their family. So I think if we return to the moral values embedded in the marketplace, while at the same time keeping a strong commitment to tzedakah and care for those who have fallen through the cracks, I think we can have a society that's economically vibrant and, if I might use the term, spiritually whole.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, today we finished the book of Leviticus, so let's say Chazak
Chazak
v'nitchazek. And thank you all for watching. Thank you for teaching today, Marc and Sherre. Thank you to everyone for sharing Shabbos. Following Torah study, of course, at 10 o'clock, we have Shabbos morning prayers. And this morning we celebrate the bat mitzvah of Samara Stern, a wonderful young woman who studied very hard and has wonderful prayer and Torah to share with us. And then following that, a little bit later this morning at about 11:45, our dear friend Rabbi Hillel Silverman has a few words about this week's Torah portion, and you're invited to tune in for that. This coming week, apropos of our conversation, on Wednesday night in the Rabbi's study, I'm going to be speaking with a number of the important people in Los Angeles about the problem of homelessness here in LA. Molly Reisman works for the county. Rabbi Noah Farkas, my colleague, is the chair of the County Commission on Homelessness, and Stephanie Klasky-Gamer is the head of Los Angeles Housing. They're going to be talking to us about the homeless, what we've done to try to address this issue, and what can be done, and how this coronavirus crisis has affected the homeless. That's Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Facebook Live, the VBS page. We wish everybody a really good Shabbos. Stay well, stay warm, take good care of each other, stay safe.